Mimori Shinoju stood up and left the room. It had been nearly a year and a half since Shinichi's eyes lost their light. Although he had grown accustomed to this dark world, he still couldn't move around without groping the furniture in the house. He had yet to escape the anxiety that traps always lurked with each step he took unexpectedly. Shinoju ran his left hand over the sliding door and slowly lifted his feet. He caressed the pillar in the corner of the living room, then turned through the veranda, heading to the dining room. He reached for a door and then sat down on the porch. The unusually cold night air for this season enveloped his face. In the cold, there was a faint smell of budding plants and grass. It was very late. Shinoju frowned slightly. With the cold like this, it must have been late. Yet his wife, Keiyo, had not returned. Once a month, Kei would go to Rinchuji Temple in a village a mile down from the town. In the main hall of the temple, there was a statue of Fujisawa Shūhei, which was said to have the virtue of healing eye diseases, and Kei went there to pray. It seemed she still believed that her husband's eyes could be saved. Shinoju didn't know when he started to feel the presence of another man in Keiyo's temple visits. Perhaps it was last autumn. That autumn, he was abandoned by the eye Dr. Kusanagi Kusuke. The doctor said that it was useless to treat him any further. Hearing this, Shinoju was not afraid because he had already prepared himself. That resignation gradually became clearer while being treated by Kusuke. Or maybe he should try living as a blind man. Thinking this way, Shinoju felt that his heart had always been looking outward with a fragile hope, but now it was deeply immersed in introspection and wandering thoughts. That resentful and immersed heart made the figure of the man behind his wife's temple visits clearer, which he had ignored for so long. At first, Shinoju thought it was just a delusional fantasy. Without Keiyo, he couldn't dress himself or eat. He was annoyed by the filthy jealousy of men who felt inferior to their wives. But then, he realized that something still didn't disappear. Although he could no longer see, Shinoju felt that his ears were sharper than before, and his nose could distinguish the most subtle fragrances. It wasn't overnight that his hearing and sense of smell became so sensitive, but he thought it was just to compensate for the last vision. So he had to rely on other senses of the body, making his ears and nose work harder than before. Not a single sound, no matter how small, escaped his ears, and his nose could discern the distinct sense of everything. Even his hands seemed to have a new touch different from when he could see. When Shinoju noticed this, he sighed to himself that he had truly become blind. Those sharp ears, that sensitive nose, could now detect things that had never been present in his wife. Although not clear evidence, it was a strange and vague feeling, and although vague, it was hard to deny that feeling. Shinoju sat still, not bothering to move, facing the garden. There was a smell of cooking rice from the kitchen. It must have been that Kei returned late, so the old servant Tokuhei had cooked the rice. Occasionally, there was a coughing sound from the kitchen. Old Tokuhei had been working for the Mimura family since before Shinoju was born, and he had also aged in that house. Shinichi's house only had him and his wife, and the old servant. His parents died early. Keiyo had been married into this house for 5 years, but the two still had no children. The house was very quiet. Because of the quiet, Shinichi's suspicions focused straight on his wife and could not be confused with anything else. The sound of Keiyo's return was known to Shinoju sooner than anyone else. The small gate closed, with the sound of wooden clogs approaching. Keiyo suddenly stopped in her tracks, bewildered. Perhaps she was surprised to see the silhouette of her husband outside on the dark porch.
Is that you? What are you doing out there?
Just enjoying the night breeze.
But it's very cold outside.
Keiyo spoke and then made her way to the garden, coming to stand in front of Shinoju and taking his hand.
I'm sorry for being late because I was caught up talking with the monk at the temple.
While speaking, Keiyo gently rubbed the back of Shinichi's hand, an action she would not have dared to consider when her husband's eyes were still clear. Then, deciding no longer to flee from Shinichi's blindness, Keiyo bravely began to touch her husband's body more. Shinoju remained silent, allowing his wife to hold his hand. Keiyo's breathing was hurried. Perhaps she was in a rush because it was late, or maybe she was out of breath from the surprise of finding her husband in the darkened porch.
Have you eaten yet?
Tokuhei is cooking now.
I'm sorry. I'll go get ready right away.
Keiyo hurriedly clattered her clogs and turned around, making her way out to the main gate. Meanwhile, Shinoju stood up and closed the outer doors on the house's veranda. Once upstairs, Keiyo helped Shinoju into the dining room. waited for her husband to sit up straight, then lit the lantern and placed it in the kitchen. The scent of the makeup is too strong, Shinoju thought to himself. The scent of the makeup was stronger than when she left the house at noon. Perhaps she met a man along the way and touched up her makeup. It's truly unfortunate that such suspicions have deeply permeated his being. Shinoju wanted to believe that it was just an unfounded fantasy. However, his doubt towards Keo, including the recent suspicions, had grown so immense that it was immovable. That's how Shinoju felt. Yet Keo exhibited no signs of revulsion or withdrawal from her blind husband. On the contrary, her actions suggested a deepening closeness. Now more than ever, Keo was tenderly intimate with Shinoju. With the delicacy of a nurse, she soothed the itch of her impaired husband. Her heart had not retreated from him. Of this, Shinoju held no doubts. If one were to overlook the shadow of impropriety in Shinoju's eyes at first glance, the household seemed to be passing through tranquil, uneventful days. Yet, it was precisely these calm days that made the shadow lurking behind Keo all the more conspicuous. Once a month, after visiting the temple, Keo's breath would become strangely agitated, unlike her usual self. In the days that followed, her demeanor also changed, as if she had returned from a clandestine rendezvous with a lover, her words and actions becoming awkward and evasive. It was as if she were a sinner trying to conceal her guilt, or like someone returning from another world, unable to hide the everyday slips that now made her panic. This was not something that could be attributed to the ordinary act of temple worship. Or suppose there was this man. Who could he be? Shinoju couldn't begin to guess, only finding it strange as the silhouette of the man became clearer day by day, and the matter of Keo having someone else was equally baffling to him. After all, Keo wasn't the frivolous type. She was a woman of caution and modesty. It was this oddity that made his jealousy fade into a baseless haze somewhere deep within him. But of course, this was not a matter to be overlooked. He thought that once the immoral truth of Keo was revealed, it had to be dealt with uncompromisingly.